Hi, I'm Genevieve. My thesis is entitled Anencephalic Infants as Organ Donors, Altruism at the Intersection of Personhood, Consciousness, and Brain Birth. Okay, so a background on anencephaly. It is a fatal birth defect that stems from a neural tube defect. This happens very early on in embryological development. It's when the neural tube fails to close, which gives way to the brain and the skull and the spine. And so if it's left open, then the amniotic fluid damages what's developing and it can't develop. So most of these pregnancies end in either miscarriage or stillbirth. The infants who are born pretty much with only a brain stem. So they have no consciousness, no awareness. They're usually blind and deaf, and they're unable to feel pain. This is obviously incompatible with life. They live a few hours to a few days, sadly. So this occurs in about 1 in 1,000 pregnancies and 1 in 10,000 live births in the United States. There's a couple of ways to detect it that I will let you guys read for the sake of time. So now a background on pediatric organ donation. Organs are scarce and demand is high, as with adults. There's more than 2,000 children in need of an organ transplant, and children younger than 1 year have the highest death rate waiting for an organ transplant. The size of the organ in the body is really important in matching with pediatric patients. So that's one of the main concerns. So here are a few laws and policies that govern organ donation in the United States. You can read those on your own. The main thing to know is that because anencephalic infants have a functioning brain stem, they do not meet the criteria for brain death. If you wait for them to satisfy the criteria for cardiopulmonary death, then their organs are no longer viable. This, of course, brings up the question whether it's ethical to declare them dead or to say that you're basically functionally dead if you only have a brain stem. So my argument is in 2 parts. The first part is regarding personhood and consciousness. So I think when talking about anencephalic infants, when I was reading, all the literature, there's a lot of debate on why they should be considered dead. And I think a more apt argument is why they should not be considered alive, which is kind of semantics for a policy, legal standpoint. But I think it's an important philosophical distinction. So, in organ donation, we can replace basically anything else. The brain is the one unique, irreplaceable organ. That's the seat of consciousness. And so that's where we derive our personhood from. So I make the distinction that while anencephalic infants obviously might meet the criteria for having qualities of life being like the rudimentary, biology definition, there's a difference between that and being alive. So I argue that the absence of a brain is equivalent to the absence of human life. And that's based on, that should say, brain life theory and brain birth, which is the theory that you are a human being when a brain starts to function. We can talk about that. The second part that I talk about is death and dying. So if you're looking at the death of a 30-year-old versus the death of an 80-year-old, I think most people would say that the death of the 30-year-old is more tragic. And that's because, as McMahon says, we're measuring, what they would have enjoyed, what they missed out on. And that's in response to what Nagel posited, which is there's this innate badness of death because you're missing out on the good had death not happened. And my argument is that an anencephalic infant is not missing out on those things because of death. It's not death's fault. It's the fault of not having a brain. And so there is no measured badness of death for an anencephalic infant from the infant's perspective. And so further, the precise time of death doesn't change anything, alter the possibilities of this goodness that Nagel talks about, but it does for the infants awaiting organ transplant. And as Callahan said, in the case of anencephaly, there is no potential future life of the original individual, but there exists a potential for the promotion of future autonomous life of another. So I think in the face of a very tragic situation, if the pregnant person decides to continue with the pregnancy, the parent should have the option to donate their organs, and that the definition of death should that anencephalic infants before the cessation of brainstem function should be eligible to be organ donors. All right, thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Great. Comments, reactions, thoughts? Abby.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, the statement that like absence of a brain equals absence of a human life. I was wondering if you think that has any implications for people living with like brain damage or brain function that's maybe not what we would consider normal. Like, do you think making that statement has any implications on what people might think about the value of life for those people?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I was worried I wasn't going to have time to touch on that. But my argument is that it's not just a lack of consciousness, not just a lack of cognitive functioning, but they're missing the structure entirely, and there's no potential. So while I think that there is an argument to say that, patients in a persistent vegetative state are functionally dead, I think it's not morally, ethically equivalent to an anencephalic infant who never experienced this brain birth, right? They never had personhood. In my mind, they were never a human being. And in a philosophical sense, they didn't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Arthur.
So this is a great presentation, Genevieve. Thank you so much. So one question is, there are very few born, right? Many are lost before birth even occurs. Have you been able to figure out how many cases of potentially life-saving transplantation could occur, with an organ from an infant or neonate, maybe not really a fully human infant? How many other human lives could be saved? Have you been able to dig out some potential statistic on that?
No, well, right now, since they can't be organ donors, there isn't like any statistics to go off of. Their organs, if they are born, can also be underdeveloped. So it's not like you could say, one anencephalic infant can donate, 5 organs and save 5 lives. There's fewer than 500 born each year. So it's really hard to give a number. This was a very hot debate in the 90s when there was an anencephalic infant whose parents wanted her to be an organ donor, and that kind of like fueled the flames of debate. obviously a lot of medical advances since the 90s. Children under 1 year old who would be, the individuals receiving transplant from a neonate. The greatest demand is for a heart, and I forget the name of the procedure and the abnormality, but the greatest reason for a heart transplant is now being surgically dealt with. So there's practically, it's not really like a practical thing, but I think it's a worthwhile, like, ethical, philosophical exercise.
I know your time was limited, but you can also remind them that in the early 90s, the AMA briefly actually authorized this very practice. If parents could consent to and it's right. I know that's where a lot of the articles you found were written around the early 90s. But you're saying it could be more productive now if it were conceptually and ethically accepted.
I'm saying it would be less productive now because of surgical techniques. And it's, from what I read, it seems like those people who are pregnant with an anencephalic infant, more people have decided to go the route of abortion.
So just to be clear, this is not legal anywhere or performed anywhere. Is that right? At the moment?
There were a few times in the late 60s that they did this. And then there was the ad hoc committee out of Harvard that changed things. And so they no longer, actually, they didn't meet the criteria then either. They submerged the infants in ice water in order for them to be dead. So no, this is not allowed anywhere in the United States.
Well, fascinating. Thank you so much. And just in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on, but excellent job, Genevieve. Thank you.